The Metro on 1019 WDET FM, Detroit Public Radio. I'm Tia Graham.
And I'm Robin Vincent. Sports is a game of massive money. Professional athletes have been cashing in for decades. But in recent years, student athletes and sports fans have been officially brought into the game too. The NCAA's name, image, and likeness policies have given student athletes the opportunity to be paid. And sports betting has raised the stakes on games for fans who are looking to turn a quick profit.
Robin, this month is March Madness, and it is taking center stage. But how has this new era changed the way we interact with sports? We want to hear from you on the money that's surrounding this tournament and in sports overall. How has it changed for you as a fan, if it changed you at all? Call in and let us know, 313-577-1019. But first, we want to discuss how sports betting has grown and the impacts it has. Joining us now is Rachel Volberg. She's a professor of epidemiology at the University of Massachusetts Amherst who researches gambling. Professor Volberg, welcome to the Metro.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. So let's lay down some groundwork. Sports betting has been around for a while, though it's only been legal in Michigan for a little while. When did it really take off?
So sports betting legalization exploded subsequent to the overturning of a law that was passed in 2011 in New Jersey, but overturned by the Supreme Court in 2018. Which said that the law that was overturned prohibited states from conducting sports betting. And following that, many states have legalized sports betting. There are now 38 states and the District of Columbia that operate legal sports betting around the country.
And how did that change or impact the industry as a whole, whether it's NBA, whatever it is? How did it impact the industry of sports?
Well, it definitely made a lot of money for the sports betting operators. It made somewhat less money for the states that tax those gross gaming revenues. And it certainly generated a great deal of sort of relationship creation between the professional and amateur or collegiate sports leagues and the sports betting operators.
And honestly, thinking about it, for some like myself, I don't do much gambling or looking at it in that way. How prevalent is sports betting in the U.S.?
Well, we don't really know the answer to that question at the national level because there is no national monitoring of gambling behavior. What I can tell you is that in Massachusetts, where we've been studying casinos and sports betting for quite a long time now, about 12 years. Even before sports betting was legal in Massachusetts, which happened in 2022, back 10 years earlier, about 13% of adults in Massachusetts had bet on sports in the past year. After the legalization of sports betting, we've seen an uptick, but it really has not gone much beyond about 20% of the population, so 2 people out of 10.
And we do know that states and local municipalities stand to make money from gambling. What about the bettors themselves, those who are actually going out there and placing these bets?
Well, those are gross gaming revenues are the profits that the multinational sports betting operators keep after people have lost money that they've bet. So the likelihood is that you are not going to win. That's why they call it the house edge. There are obviously, as with lotteries and casinos and every other kind of gambling, there are some people who win, but because of the way that different types of gambling are structured, there's a reason why those companies stay in business.
And Professor, what about gambling addiction? Does sports betting lead people to become more addicted in the same traditional ways that we're used to seeing?
So sports betting by itself and as it was done traditionally, where you bet on which team was going to win, or you bet on how many points they would win by, that kind of gambling, that kind of sports betting, is actually not any riskier than other types of gambling. The reason you see higher rates of gambling problems amongst sports bettors when you look at survey data is because sports bettors tend to do multiple types of gambling. They don't just do sports betting. They do, they go to casinos, they buy lottery tickets, they bet on, things with their friends. What has changed quite recently is the nature of sports betting as it has rolled out online in the United States. We've seen more and more push to have people participate in proposition betting, as it's called, or in parlays. And what that does effectively is turn a lottery ticket into a slot machine.
Okay, I definitely need a breakdown of that a little bit, because I see parlays, I see it, I'm like, I don't know what that means, but I see it often. So what does that mean?
So a parlay is where you take one bet. So, my team is going to win. My team is going to win by X points. That's traditional sports betting. A proposition bet would be, betting on which way the coin toss is going to go, betting on who's going to, what the first play in the game is going to be. And then a parlay is linking all of those bets together so that they all have to play out and occur in order for the person to win. And what makes them very attractive is that, it seems like a pretty small stake for each additional piece you put on the parlay, but the odds get longer and longer and longer for that large payout.
That sounded like a lot of mental power to get some money. And I'm thinking to myself as a person who's, I would consider myself a cheap person. When I hear that, I just think about all the problems that could happen, all the things that can go wrong, and how I'm going to lose my money. So, you believe parlays are particularly problematic? Is that a fair statement to say?
Well, parlays are problematic in the sense that people don't really understand the change in the odds when you link multiple events together. It becomes more and more difficult to win, and so it's very immersive when you're making bet after bet after bet, or you've put a whole bunch of bets together and you're like attending to all of the different aspects that you've bet on. It's a very immersive experience, and that's really where the danger is.
And just really quickly as well, just staying there with the immersive experience, because phones, and we have our phones in our hands, and now that it's just so easily accessible to bet from your phone, can you talk about how that's also created another layer of access to gambling?
Yeah, so in the world that I live in, epidemiology, we know that there is a established link between increases in the availability of gambling and rates of gambling problems in the population. So we first identified that in the 1990s, when a lot of states started legalizing commercial casinos. And we did a number of surveys where we found that the prevalence of problem gambling, the proportion of the population that has a problem, increased in the years following the introduction of casinos. So what you have with your smartphone and one or more sports betting apps on your smartphone is you have a startlingly large increase in availability because it's sitting right there. And we have seen some evidence in some of the state surveys that we've done that availability is leading to increases in sports betting participation. And inevitably, when you have very substantial increases in participation, some proportion of those people are going to get into difficulties.
Yeah, and it's very interesting to see how young people are really getting into it now. You're listening to the Metro on 1019 WDET FM. I'm Tia Graham.
And I'm Robin Vincent. We're discussing how addictive sports betting can be with University of Massachusetts Amherst professor Rachel Volberg. Professor Volberg, I want to listen back to a guest we had on our airwaves and what he had to say. His name's Saul Malik, and he's a compulsive gambler in recovery.
I think naturally for me, I do have a nature of being an impulsive personality. And I think that jumping right into betting on sports was something that from the onset, I really didn't think through. It was just a very natural progression just because I loved the rush of it. I loved the action and I liked the feeling that I had of being a big shot. So it was sort of that I'd primed myself for all these years. And I also like to say that my relationship with sports was already unhealthy. I already had too much of a vested interest in the results of sports games to determine my happiness or lack thereof. So it was really that I just kind of walked right into it based on previous patterns I established.
So, Professor Volberg, it sounds like Saul Malik, he feels he had almost primed himself for this problem, for this addiction to gambling. I wonder how common you find his story to be.
Well, let's say it's not uncommon. We do know that when you have diagnosis for a gambling problem, it's usually not a standalone problem. People who have gambling problems tend to have other mental health issues, depression, anxiety. There's also some research suggesting that people who develop gambling problems have higher rates of impulsivity, which is a personality characteristic. But really, at the end of the day, and in my view, the focus should not be on the individual being managing their own behavior. What really doesn't get much attention is the characteristics and the structural characteristics of the product itself, of the games themselves.
Right. Yeah, I appreciate that perspective. Of course, for you as an epidemiologist, someone who focuses on public health, you're looking at the systems in place, where the problems are within the systems versus the individual. So what do you think needs to change?
Well, there really needs to be a shift in focus from individual gamblers, in my view, to regulation of the operators in ways that offer people tools, but also make it very easy for people, even those who don't feel like they have a problem, to adopt those tools. So for example, if there was an extensive system where when you sign up for a new sports betting app, you have to opt out of sort of protections like deposit limits and time limits and money limits, making it an opt-out system rather than opt-in gives people the message that this is something that's normal, that everybody who gambles is given this opportunity to set these limits, and it makes it more normal than sort of offering it as a tool that most people would say, oh, I don't have a gambling problem, so I'm not going to use those tools.
Who would you say is most affected by sports betting?
Well, we've known for a long time that the most avid sports bettors are young men with some disposable income. But that has been changing a bit as sports betting has rolled out across the country, partly because the sports betting operators have been marketing very heavily to grab market share, and they've been focusing on growing the overall sports betting pie by advertising to young adults, but also to women, to college students, and perhaps inadvertently, but one of the groups that's most vulnerable to developing a gambling problem is someone who's had a problem in the past. And the ubiquitousness, the in-your-faceness of sports betting advertising makes it very hard for people in recovery to maintain that recovery.
You know, as we're talking about the folks who are directly affected when it comes to sports betting, it also has me wondering about the players. Does sports betting have any impact on them?
Yes, I think it does. Certainly professional athletes are, receive like once a year, they get a training that tells them, you're not allowed to bet in the clubhouse. But as we've seen from some of the stories that have broken over the last year or so, that kind of training is not necessarily as effective as we would like. And there are athletes now who have been banned for life from their sport for affecting the integrity of the game. And that is not good news for the professional leagues because really, the integrity of the game is something that they have protected for many, many years, and it seems to have gone by the board a bit in this sudden expansion of sports betting in the U.S.
What are some ways, Professor Vollberg, that people can reduce or check their addiction to sports gambling? What have you found in your research to be effective?
In terms of identifying whether someone has a problem?
In terms of slowing down that problem, of trying to get it under control.
So we've asked people, who in our surveys who we identify as having moderate to severe gambling problems. We've asked them if they have wanted treatment or sought treatment. And the majority of people, even experiencing very severe problems, really want to at least initially try and control their problem on their own. And the main resource for people who are trying to go it alone is support from friends and family. So, basically letting your friends and family know that you don't want to talk about sports, or you don't want to talk about betting on sports, and you don't want to, sort of have the money flying around, is one way to sort of, use your support system to try to get that issue under control. We also know that, a gambling problem takes a while to develop. And so if someone expresses to you that they think you're over involved in gambling, it would be good to sort of take that seriously and, get some information for yourself about what resources are available out there. There are many online groups out there. There are tools that you can put in place to prevent yourself from logging on to your sports betting accounts. So there are a lot of ways to sort of, put the brakes on that are available online, or, if you feel that you want to engage with people in person, there are recovery support groups, for example, for gamblers. So there's a lot of different things that can be done, but the main thing is to catch it early on and to reduce your participation to a place that you're comfortable with.
Rachel Vollberg is a professor of epidemiology at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. Professor Vollberg, thank you so much for joining us on the Metro.
Thank you for having me.
This is the Metro on 101. 101.9 WDET FM. And coming up, we'll continue our conversation about money in sports. And this time, we're going to talk about money in college sports and college athletes. Are they making too much? Are they not making enough? Should they be making anything? Give us a call and let us know. 313-577-1019. Stay with us on the Metro. We will be right back. To the Metro on WDET FM. I'm Tia Graham.
And I'm Robin Vincent. After years of exploitation, college athletes are getting paid. Thanks to so-called name, image, and likeness deals, they can make money from their popularity and performance. But paying college athletes was at the center of a lot of hot debates. Now that it's been around for a few years, let's assess its impact.
Joining us now to help us do that is B. David Ridpath. He is a professor of sports business at Ohio University. Professor Ridpath, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Tia and Robin. I really appreciate you having me on.
Of course. So let's just jump into things. The argument about whether student athletes should be paid is settled, at least for now. So can we paint the two sides here? Why did it take so long for college athletes to get paid?
Well, when you're looking historically, you have to understand that we are the only country in the world that has a significant portion of elite and commercialized sport embedded in the education system. And we lived under a construct, what I would call a false construct of amateurism for many years. And then since the 1950s, in a way to try to combat what was going on under the table payments and things that we heard about over the years, that was even going on pre-1950. The scholarship, the academic scholarship or athletic scholarship, was brought into play as a way to, one, compensate athletes and hopefully keep them from taking under the table payments and recruiting inducements. And of course, that didn't stop. But it really became this connection of, hey, you're getting a quote unquote free or low-cost college education in return for athletic participation. And for many, and I even understand the thought process, that seemed to be an acceptable trade-off because college is very expensive. Many people save a lifetime for it. And, hey, if you're a talented athlete, you have a chance to get your college paid for. So it sounded like an acceptable trade-off, but it never really did meet the true valuation that college athletics brings to an institution.
Exactly. I would love to stay there and just take a look at this through the historical lens as you talked about, because this is new to me. Before even the 1950s, we're seeing money and student athletes being paid. So can we just talk about the timeline and how we've watched it kind of ebb and flow and grow truly? For my time, I believe, or remember, LeBron James and him going through that situation, especially with the Hummer when he was in high school still. So there were just so many different things that were happening. So can we talk about when we really saw that peak hit, when we saw student athletes really clamoring for their money, for their likeness?
I think you could always say, through history, and you go back to a report even in 1929 called the Carnegie Foundation Report on Higher Education, and it talked about a lot of these issues going on with athletes being worth, more money, getting paid under the table, all those things. But it really came to a crescendo. I think the best thing that I would say, Tia and Robin, is looking back in the 80s when the NCAA had absolute control over television. And you're much younger than me, I believe, and you probably don't remember that we used to be able to only watch one college football game on a weekend. Right. And you're up there in Michigan. I live in Ohio. If Ohio State and Michigan was not selected as the national game, you could not watch that. Imagine that today. So what happened is that the University of Oklahoma and Georgia in 1984 sued the NCAA for the ability to broadcast their own games because they knew there was a lot of revenue there that conferences and individual institutions could get. And there's a famous Supreme Court case called the Board of Regents versus the NCAA The NCAA lost that case, and that's what opened up the commercial spigot, if you will, and that's when the real money with regards to sponsorships, television rights, ticket sales really started to flow into college athletics. And you, of course, had kind of simultaneous to that the Final Four with Magic Johnson and Larry Bird. College sports truly became commercial, widespread. And then where I grew up in Colorado, we could even now watch Alabama football, Ohio State football, North Carolina basketball, things that we couldn't watch before. And then college sports moved from a regional really product to a national professionalized sport product. And that's really when the clamoring started of, wait, these athletes are the ones that we're watching. These athletes are the ones that are worth money. Why are we, one, not paying them, but why are we also criminalizing when they get a sandwich, when they get $1 above a scholarship? Why are we punishing people for doing that? But yet we're starting to pay coaches. It sounds almost quaint. Hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, and then leading up to today where we're paying coaches $10, $20 million a year. It's not justifiable to not pay the labor.
And, at this, even for myself going through school, number one, I'm a Spartan myself. So shout out to Magic Johnson in the 1977 championship there. That was so great for that. I love that. But as well, just thinking about money and student athletes and watching it grow and crescendo, like you said, especially when we see the rights for streaming, whether it's Big Ten or right now Peacock. So many folks are upset about Peacock having the rights to some of these games. So can we talk about the big money in sports in terms of these media contracts and how we're seeing it funnel through these universities and almost not touch some of the student athletes, because larger name athletes are getting the money, but some of the smaller athletes are not. So can we talk about how this money is being distributed?
Yeah, and this is a lot of it is TBA, to be honest, Tia, is we're looking at a really new thing, even though name, image, and likeness. And when you think about this, it almost sounds crazy, but going back to 2021, to think that we restricted college athletes, but we didn't restrict any other college student from being able to capitalize on their brand identity, and brand value. Once we allowed that, many people thought that that's going to destroy the interest in college athletics. Well, that's not the case. The stadiums are still being filled. In Columbus, when Michigan State and Michigan come to Columbus and vice versa, those stadiums are filled. People are still watching March Madness, which is going on right now. So it really doesn't matter if the athletes get paid. So now the next fight really is, okay, are the athletes going to become employees and be able to unionize and collectively bargain, which I think should happen, because then the athletes would have a greater voice, and it would also protect the institution from antitrust issues. However, NCAA institutions are fighting back against this mightily, saying they can't be employees. We're going to go ahead and revenue share because we lost the Alston case and the House case. We lost those cases. We're going to now share, at least going into next year, potentially $20.5 million if the settlement is approved, and I think it will be. And then that's going to escalate over 10 years to over $33 million. But institutions have already said the bulk of that money is going to go to football, men's and women's basketball, and very little is going to go to the other sports. So I think we're at a bit of a crossroads here. We have to decide as a nation, are we going to continue to be the only nation in the world that develops our elite athletes primarily through the educational system? I personally believe that we need to look at alternative models, because even though it shouldn't happen, the money is there. Our sports, and I'm a wrestler, and I used to be a Division I assistant wrestling coach. Sports like wrestling, swimming, gymnastics, and other sports will begin to suffer, and our international standing will begin to suffer, because I do believe that we're going to funnel more and more money into certain sports. Now, we shouldn't do that. We don't have to do that, but that's what institutions are going to do. So what's going to happen in the future? You're going to see more court cases. You're going to see more litigation. Title IX is not going to go away. So where this ends up in 5 or 10 years is anybody's guess, but we haven't seen the end of it.
You're listening to The Metro on 101.9 WDET FM. I'm Tia Graham.
And I'm Robin Vincent. We're speaking with sports business professor B. David Ridpath about the impact on college sports that the name, image, and likeness deal, which is allowing college athletes to reap some compensation, the effects that that is having. We want to hear from you. Should athletes be paid? Give us a call, 313-577-1019. Professor Ridpath, do you think we should completely separate college sports from college to essentially make college athletes part of, say, the minor leagues in their respective sport?
Well, I think, Robin, they're already the minor leagues for sports. That's the one thing I do stress, that's already been done. Has been codified for close to almost 100 years as far as the draft system and things that we do. And we're developing athletes for various sports. Take a sport like field hockey, which doesn't have a professional league, but we're developing players for our national teams, to compete in the Olympics and other things like that. So it's already, I hesitate to use the term minor because it sounds detrimental. It's just another developmental aspect in our sports system. I do think that we can do a couple things here. I think that we can separate college sports from the university per se. You could still have that connection to the university, but it could be as an auxiliary. Right now you have a medical school, could be as an auxiliary, the dining facilities, perhaps some dormitories or even, private auxiliaries. You could do that. You could still have that connection to the school, still have those events. But those players could be employees like any other employee at the institution. They would get tuition benefits if they wanted to use those as any other employee. I think there's things that we can do educationally so that those athletes would have access to education at a later time. But I also think that we need to explore as a country, and this is my most recent book, a shameless plug here, Alternative Models of Sports Development in America, where I discuss ways where we need to actually separate at least some of our sports away from the educational system, at least from the elite development perspective, and then have still more of a participatory model, whether it's at the primary, secondary, or higher education system. Again, it's important, TN Robin, to stress we're the only country in the world that does this. I kind of equate it to our system of weights and measures. It's kind of crazy that we do it the way we do. We need to explore some other ways. I spend a lot of time in Europe. There's some great templates over there for grassroots sports development and sports being out of the education system as far as elite development, and we should do more of that. But I do think we're going to see a connection of college sports forever, at least in some way. But college athletes are now going to get paid overtly, and that's never going to change. We're never going back to the days of amateurism. We're never going back to the days of where the athletes only get a scholarship. We're never going back to the days where athletes are going to be restricted on where they transfer, because as normal college students, they should be able to do all those things. And there are other college students that do all those things on a daily basis if we're going to insist that they're students. However, if we get to the point of collective bargaining and unionization, then the schools can negotiate those working conditions and then be able to protect themselves from potential antitrust lawsuits, which we're likely going to see a lot of those over the next few years until we get to collective bargaining and unionization. So there's a lot of ways we can go. We just can't keep doing what we're doing now.
Professor Ridpath, this is Tia jumping back in really quickly because I did want to connect that conversation you're having right now about amateur sports, amateur athletes. And one thing that is noted is that the Olympic Games used to be pretty much our amateur athletes until the professional sports started to get into it. Before the Dream Team, there were just amateurs playing on the sport. Can you talk about how it all has kind of just changed and how money has an impact on it all?
Well, I think the issue is that you have to look at amateurism was really something that wasn't widely practiced around the world as we maybe did it from an American perspective, right? You look at the Miracle on Ice, which has been talked about because I think we just passed the 40 or 45th anniversary. That Russian team we played, they were not amateur athletes. They were getting paid lots of money. They got houses, lots of other things. So amateurism itself has been something that has been a very fluid concept. I think the only thing that is true amateurism, Tia and Robin, is if we all went out and we played tennis or something, just as people play. That's amateurism. And so the Olympics themselves have never truly, going back to the 1500s, back have never truly been amateur. And we tried to put this construct in college athletics, and we had this problem of where we are saying, or we're saying, maybe even today we are, that the participants are students, but we treat them as employees. And you can't have it both ways. And eventually, the Amateur Sports Act that happened in the 80s, the 70s and 80s, came to fruition, saying, look, we need to allow professional athletes in the Olympics because other countries are doing the same. And I think we would all agree the Olympics are more popular than ever. The amateurism construct doesn't matter, and we want to see the best players in these high-level athletic competitions. And it's the same thing in college athletics today. When I say we, I mean and just in general, just the overall percentages. We really don't care that college athletes are receiving compensation now, and the proof is in the pudding. The stadiums are still full. March Madness is going to be crazy. We're still watching the product, and that's never going to go away.
Professor Ridpath, what is the average amount of money that a college athlete is making now?
Well, it really varies, and there's not a lot of data out there, but you hear some really astronomical numbers. And it's also benefited female athletes tremendously because many female athletes have brand value. Many of what we would say, quote unquote, are Olympic sport athletes, sports outside the commercially popular ones, like the men's and women's basketball that we're seeing now, are making, lots of money. And they're making lots of money even for things beyond their athletic brand value. We used to restrict if somebody was an actor, if somebody was a singer. We used to restrict them being able to go out and make money. Jeremy Bloom, who you might remember, the famous skier who played at the University of Colorado, he was a model and was told he couldn't earn money as a model because he was an amateur athlete. But to get to your question, Robin, is basically I've heard all kinds of numbers in the millions of dollars to hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I hear a couple of things that have always, I would say, disturbed me. Is one, people saying, well, they don't deserve that much money. Well, who's to say that? It's based upon market value. I don't think coaches should be getting paid as much as they do at the college level. College athletes have value. They have a lot of value, and it's really what people are willing to pay them. The other thing I hear is, well, these are young men and women. They don't have the ability to handle that kind of money, which I laugh about because there's people my age who don't know how to handle the money. And
Sure.
candidly, there's underlying racism to that, because most of the time I'll hear people say that and they'll say, well, I just don't think these young black athletes are able to handle the money. And I get really uncomfortable with that because bottom line is it's their money and they should be able to do with it what they want. But we also have the resources at institutions and other things to help people get money management, experience to help them. But in the end, it's their money, and they're getting paid what people are willing to pay them, and that's their value, and that's the way the free market system and capitalism works.
And you feel that this can really be something that can level the playing field for women athletes?
Well, definitely. You're seeing, obviously, Caitlin Clark, Angel Reese, Livy Dunn, and thankfully we are doing things to promote women's sports more than we ever have. And so a lot of fantastic women athletes, female athletes at the intercollegiate level are getting their due, and many of them are cashing in, as they should, big. Now, look, the disparity is still there. Male athletes are making more money from their name, image, and likeness, but it certainly has I can't say really level the playing field, but it has given female athletes a great opportunity to cash in on these opportunities. And the other thing, too, what's interesting about it is it has really leveled the playing field in a way, if you could talk about just college sports overall, because you are seeing young men and women who are going to institutions. Let me give you an example of you have someone like, an athlete at Michigan State who might be the third string quarterback, but he could come to Ohio University or he could come to Rutgers and be the starting quarterback. And then as a starting quarterback, be able to really get potentially generate a lot of name, image, and likeness money. So you're starting to see a lot of athletes that might have stayed at a Michigan or Michigan State who might transfer to another school because of the name, image, and likeness opportunities, and that team is essentially a little bit better. I mean, I think the best example is when Deion Sanders was at Jackson State, and the number one football recruit in the country went to Jackson State, HBCU, and he was recruited by every major Division I football program in the country.
Coach Prime, a good example there. Professor Ridpath, we want to go to the phones here for a moment. Mike in Windsor, what is on your mind?
This is a really interesting topic because I lamented the transformation when it became an over the table as opposed to under the table payment, because I saw it as a missed opportunity. And the reason why it was a missed opportunity to benefit all students across all sports was because the proposition of being a full-time Division I athlete is essentially an impossibility. Josh Rosen kind of spoke to this when he was a college quarterback playing at UCLA. He said, I've got 3 full-time jobs. And in essence, we can't ever expect anybody to be really a great student and a full-time college football player at the University of Michigan at the same time. That's an unreasonable expectation of ours. What they should have done was say, we're going to spread it out and basically do scholarship deferral across all athletes and across all sports. Because now what's happened is that you've got tremendous player movement and the transfer portal. And as a result, from a fan's perspective, it's much worse because you failed there fails to be any real bond with the players. But as far as getting away from the college model, which you had alluded to before, these are businesses that took eons to build up to the heights that they are. And I take my daughters, I have 3 of them, and I routinely take them to Michigan women's basketball games. I love it because it's a whole lot cheaper than going to the men's game. But it's a juggernaut, and Michigan is a juggernaut. University of Texas is a juggernaut. Ohio State, these are brands, and they are brands that are not going anywhere. So the idea of separating or creating some separate league when you already have a business that's, let's face facts, tomorrow is going to be one of the biggest days of the year for college basketball. So, I mean, in essence, that's like throwing away the name Ferrari. It's like throwing away the name Lamborghini. That's just sheer lunacy. So,
Mike, thank you. Thank you so much for your call. I think we're picking up what you're laying down here, and I do want to turn back to Professor Ridpath. What are your thoughts about Mike's concerns when it comes to name, image, and likeness?
Well, I think Mike, and I think he's probably still listening. So, Mike, thank you for your question and comments. I think he brought up some very good points. I mean, number one, let's address the transfer portal. The issue with the transfer portal is if we're going to say college students are students, they have to have the same rights as other students, and other students can transfer. If we get to a point of where athletes can unionize and collectively bargain, those things can be negotiated, and that's likely where we're going. I also agree with him that we're always going to have college sports in some form and fashion, and probably the big brands like Ohio State, Michigan will always exist in some form. My point is that we do need alternative models outside of the education system, mainly for the other sports, because those are the ones that are going to get squeezed in this economic model. Even though they don't have to, the schools have the money. They could actually sponsor more sports if they wanted to. But we need to get away from America having the bulk of its elite sport development in the college athletic system. My point is that Ohio State and Michigan, regardless of how they're structured, if the athletes are paid, if they're going to school or not, whatever it may be, it's always going to be something that will pack the stadiums and be a brand that people will care about, right? But I also agree, and this is something I'm working on my new book, is yes, we do need a new educational model. We need to reframe the educational model. I am right now currently in Columbia, South Carolina at the College Sports Research Institute conference, and I'm talking exactly about this. It is ludicrous to say for a big-time athlete to say that you're going to compete essentially as a professional, have 60 hours a week of athletic responsibilities, but yet you have to be a full-time student. It's completely cheapened the degree. The University of Oregon men's basketball team.
Professor Ridpath, I'm so sorry to cut you off, but we have run out of time. We will definitely talk to you in the future, especially about the book that you're working on and everything that you're discussing right now. Professor B. David Ridpath is a professor of sports business at Ohio University. Thank you so much for joining us on the Metro.
Thank you. I could talk all day. I appreciate the time.
Coming up, we will continue our conversation about money in sports and how it impacts the way we watch sports now. With all the money that's in sports now, does it change the way you view it? Give us a call, 313-577-1019. Stay with us. We're on the Metro. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to the Metro on WDET. I'm Robin Vincent.
And I'm Tia Graham. We've been discussing how sports betting and deals and how they pay student athletes and how it's created some type of murky situation we've been dealing with. So joining us now to continue our conversation is Risa Assard. She's a professor of sports management at the University of Connecticut. Professor Assard, welcome to the Metro.
Hi, thanks so much. It's great to be here with you today.
Yes, it's great to have you. So we've been discussing sports betting and NCAA's name, image, and likeness guidelines. Let's start with betting. Have you noticed how betting has changed the way people watch sports?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, right, I think the whole premise of betting and the reason that sport leagues didn't want anything to do with it for a while is because they were afraid that it would cause levels of corruption. And while that might be true, it also is kind of happening because people are highly invested in the things that they bet on. Sports betting has changed people from just caring about winning and losing of a game to like every little thing that happens in a game. They care about games they never cared about before. They care about players they may not have even known existed before. And so sports betting has really raised the stakes quite literally for fans watching. And it's also not just kind of deepened that investment that they're making, but it's broadened it too across a wide range of different topics within the game, issues within the game, teams, and athletes.
And we have discussed that, the money within collegiate sports now have changed the way players select the schools they go to, whether or not they are going to those giant names like we heard from our caller, Mike, whether you're going to an Ohio State for that reason or Michigan State or a University of Michigan. So what's your assessment of how college athletes are getting paid now through name and image and likeness deals? Is it achieving its original intentions?
Yeah, I mean, I think in many ways it is, right? So the intentions behind name, image, and likeness were that athletes were creating value for schools, but they didn't have any right to it. But schools were profiting off of not just kind of the game production, but literally kind of the individual rights that these people have, that we all have to our name, right, to our image, our brand kind of associations, what we stand for, and then our likeness, things that kind of approximate who we are. And so the premise was that if schools can profit from this, maybe the athletes should be able to own this distinct part of themselves too, right? Like own their identity. And so in that way, I think NIL has achieved some of the kind of narrow goals of NIL, which is putting power in the players to reap the benefits of their brand kind of. And for a long time, marketers have understood athletes as a brand. We call them human brands. So in the same way that we think about, a logo of any kind of big, Fortune 500 company as a brand, or their colors or their typeface, right? Humans have brands too, particularly celebrities, including athletes. And so NIL was just a way to say, like, you have a brand and you get to own your brand.
And a lot of top earners are football and basketball players. We just discussed it a little bit, that wealth is not distributed evenly throughout colleges. Is there a concern that NIL is not an opportunity that can be seized to the same degree by athletes across the sports?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think NIL, when it comes to different sports and when it comes to different genders of athletes who are playing, is really tricky. So on the one hand, right, for women athletes, it has both been great and it's been far from perfect. So as you mentioned, men's football and men's basketball have predominantly kind of been the winners in which athletes and which sports are getting NIL deals. Institutions have overwhelmingly invested resources like quote unquote general managers, positions for these teams to support athletes in getting these deals and in making good on them. And we haven't seen that same level of investment of resources from institutions for athletes in Olympic sports or for athletes in, women's sports across the board. And so I think that's been really tricky. And on the other hand, right, we've seen some really big winners. We've seen women athletes like gymnast Livy Doon and LSU basketball star Flau'jae Johnson and UConn's Paige Beckers, get a lot of money and a lot of value from these deals. And so I think it's one of these things where we're seeing some outliers of kind of tremendous opportunity, but we know that opportunity isn't being kind of shared across the board. And then for these athletes that are kind of making it big, particularly the women athletes, what's tricky is that these athletes have the added kind of burden of the labor, of the responsibility to build and maintain that fame. because these athletes are getting less media coverage, right? They're not on national TV in the same way. They're not in headlines across online or print media in the same way.
Risa Assard is a professor of sports management at the University of Connecticut. Professor Assard, thank you so much for joining us on the Metro. We will have you back. And also say thank you to our assistant producer, Trevor McConico, for additional support this hour.
The Metro is produced by Sam Corey, Carrie Jr. II, and Jack Philbrandt. Our engineer is Nate Bender. Our senior producer is David Lyons. This is WDET-FM, Detroit Public Radio, your connection to news, music, and conversation.